This is Ben.
And this is Keith. And this is Main Street Lutherans. And today we have an opportunity to interview someone that I just met. Really should have thought that statement through a little further. Do you want to reverse the lead-in or just take it over after?
No, I really like this. This is going to be a great outtake for our promo.
Oh, good golly. Really?
Yeah. Hey, Ollie, how are you?
I'm great.
Excellent.
Leaving you speechless.
Pastor Ollie Bergh is with us here from Alaska. We get all over the continent. It is awesome. It's been great to talk to you. We've been looking forward to this for a long time. Actually, shortly after we announced that we were doing the podcast, you sent me a note on Reddit and said, "Hey, we should do something." And it took us a year to get around to that. I'm really happy we get to do this. And I'm gonna just to preface the main piece of our talk today. Pastor Ollie has a podcast called Psalmcast, and I've been subscribed for quite a while, listening to it. But there was a particular episode about the Matins service, our daily prayer service that he covered, and so I listened to that and thought, hey, we should talk about the daily offices on our podcast. But there's so many other things rich in detail for you. One of the best things I think to think about right now is being Lutheran in Alaska.
Yeah.
And I think that's just remarkable.
It surprises me that there are Lutherans in Alaska. And actually, one of the great gifts the Lutherans have given Alaska is reindeer. Let me explain. So there was a missionary, and I'm blanking on his name, but he was a very pivotal figure in the history of Alaska. One thing that he did is he divided up Alaska for the mainline denominations, and he said, okay, Lutherans, you get the Seward Peninsula, and Episcopalians, you go over here, Presbyterians, you're over here, whatever, right? And so all of our churches kind of follow this pattern more or less. But the one time he was out at one of the fish camps, every summer, right? People go fishing. It's a subsistence thing for a lot of villages and people. But he got there when it wasn't time to put the salmon up and smoke it, right? And so he sees these empty fish camps, and he thinks, oh my gosh, the people are going to starve. We got to do something. So he gets some Norwegians on the phone, and or maybe telegrams, I don't know, but right? He gets some Norwegians on the phone, and he says, hey, can you bring some reindeer in so that there'll be a crop or something for people to hunt? And they said, yeah, but can we bring a minister with us? So that's how we get reindeer in Alaska, is these Lutherans from I think it was Norway come to Alaska with their reindeer. So
wow.
And if you're in Anchorage on a sunny day, you can get a reindeer dog from a stand. They're very good, usually spicy. So, when you do, thank a Lutheran.
Wow.
That's
I wonder
fabulous.
if they have those in Minnesota. Probably not.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit before we started recording. The Alaska Synod. Alaska gets its own synod.
Mm-hmm.
What number is it?
Oh,
it's Region 1,
state.
right?
Yeah.
So one is it A?
It's 1A. 1A. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it is.
That's where it all starts. That's right. You said there are about 30 congregations in the synod?
I think that's right. It's either there's 28 congregations and 2 synodically authorized worshiping communities, or it's 30 congregations and 2 synodically authorized worshiping communities.
There's a 30 in there somewhere.
Yeah, there's some. Yeah, you'd think I would know this, but here I am. So it's small, right? There are you talked about how you've got conferences.
Well, small and yet big.
Right. The biggest synod geographically. One time, our former bishop was at one of the Texas Synod assemblies, and she had a shirt that said, "Ain't Texas cute?" And it's Texas inside of the great state of Alaska.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
That's great.
Does the synod sell those shirts?
No, they should.
They should.
Although,
right.
So I mean, everywhere you go in Alaska, not just with the Lutherans, we like to make fun of Texas. Not that Texas knows about us, right? I mean, Texas is thinking about its own, probably high school football. It's what it's thinking about. but
Yeah.
we like to remind them that we're bigger than Texas.
Yeah. So you're in Fairbanks,
Mhm. Mhm.
and what church are you with?
Fairbanks Lutheran Church,
That is quite the original name.
isn't it? Right?
That's great.
Uh, Not even First Lutheran, you'd think, but yeah, we're a little bit older than the state. We started in 1944, and I think it was 52 or 58. Alaska became the 49th state.
I think it was
So
58.
yeah,
Alaska and Hawaii both became states.
so we're a little older than the state. We've been in our kind of downtown position for a good long time. We're one of two ELCA congregations in Fairbanks. If you include the suburb of North Pole where Santa lives, there's a third. And actually, Lord of Life Lutheran, the
The
church in North
Church?
Pole,
Yeah.
it's actually down the road from Santa's house.
Wow.
It's on the same street.
Santa may even go to church there.
I was just going to ask. That's what I want to know. Where does Santa go to church?
You know what? I know on good authority he's a Nazarene.
Oh, well, I thought Santa would dance, but
Yeah, I know.
yeah. Well, that's all very, very awesome. Is there anything unique? You don't come from Alaska. You grew up in the Pacific Northwest there,
Right.
not quite as northwest as you are now, but
Right.
anything different about Lutherans in the Pacific Northwest as far as liturgy or hymns? Do you guys have any special hymns that come out of that context?
I don't know. I don't know if there's any hymns that come out of that context other than in Alaska, they have translated several hymns into Inupiaq. And so like we'll often sing like the doxology in Inupiaq when we do like synod dinners or whatever. In terms of liturgy, I mean, people get creative, I mean, and I know all throughout the Northwest, people get very creative in their liturgies. In Alaska, I had an interesting moment come up where I lead an evening service at a senior living complex, Thursday evenings. It's wonderful. We just got our new purple book, right? All Creation Sings.
Yeah,
It's got an evening communion liturgy in there.
it
Some
does.
great prayers, really poetic, and it talks about as the shadows lengthen and the moon is and all this, right? Well, in the middle
That
of the
doesn't work in the
summer,
summer or the winter, does it?
right? It's like either the sun is up or it's nothing but shadows, right? And so I had to rework them to talk about being underneath the midnight sun, and then and that was my summertime one, and then I had to do one for being underneath the aurora,
Mhm.
because
It's
especially
got
in
to be cool though
Fairbanks,
that at certain times of year you can do evening prayer at any time of day you want.
it's the only prayer you can do.
It's
I
very
mean,
convenient.
except for like you get like an hour of a little bit of sunrise,
Yeah.
and it's fun when the sun is out for that little bit of time. You see people just leave their house and just kind of stand in it for a
Oh
second,
yeah. I'm sure.
even if it's like 40 below.
Mm.
It's so hard not to talk northern exposure right now. I'll tell you. Yeah.
So I do want to ask an ignorant lower 48 American question.
Yeah.
What is the weather like in Fairbanks? I mean, clearly it varies from season to season, but tell us about what kind of swing do you get between summer and winter and how long the seasons last, et cetera.
Right. So I have experienced 50 below in the winter,
Mhm.
and I think it got to 99 above in the summer at one point. So it's a really huge difference. I think actually only Minnesota gets more of a swing than us because Minnesota is a little more continentally inland,
Mhm.
middle, I should say.
Right.
So, in the summertime, the sun is up all the time. It's usually pretty warm. Fairbanks itself is very dry. I think it's considered a desert or a tundra desert style thing, right? It's very dry. And so, my since when I moved here, I got more nosebleeds and my cuticles crack, right?
Mm.
In the winter, we get a pretty good amount of snow. This year, it's been a little less, but I'd say we had at least 5 feet this year, maybe. Anchorage might get more snow than us, but it's not as icy as Anchorage, right? Anchorage will have, because it's got the water right there, has less variation, but it's got more ice and more wind. And
More
so, I mean,
humidity and yeah. Okay.
yeah. So I way prefer Fairbanks. It's, it's kind of a joke, but it's a dry cold, right? You know,
I
Yeah,
actually heard that coming about a microsecond before you said it.
that's right. Absolutely.
and like just to give an illustration, I've learned about cold. I live in a parsonage, which is on the same block as the church, so I have a 2-minute walk. And I learned that at 30 degrees, the second you walk outside, 30 below, I should say, the second you walk outside, your pants are cold, right? Just immediately. At 40 below, it's hard to breathe. And at 50 below, you just don't go outside. It's nuts. I mean, your nose hairs instantly freeze. It's just crazy. There's a phenomenon called ice fog. I didn't even know that's a thing. You know, we went to go watch. This is a very Alaskan story. We went to go watch the Yukon Quest, which is the other dog race. It started in Fairbanks, but it was 50 below, so there was this ice fog. You couldn't even watch it, so we had to get out of the valley, so where it would clear up a little bit, so we could watch the dog race.
Wow.
And it was scary driving out. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So does your church ever call services on a Sunday because it's just too cold?
Not often. Maybe the 50 below, but I don't think it was a Sunday when that happened.
I think Keith is looking for a thing to tell his parishioners. Like, if we can do it, we could do it at 14 degrees if they can do it at minus 50.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard for me because one, my accompanist, he'll be there no matter what the weather. I mean, he'll make it what if he has to lose a leg, and it's just a short walk for me. So it's like, all right, well, we'll have church.
Awesome. Well, that's what it's like to be Lutheran in Alaska.
Wow.
We're actually talking about having more discussions about this. What being Lutheran in different synods is. So this is a great experiment with that. What we actually wanted to talk about as our main topic here is about one of the topics of your podcast. We'll talk about the Psalmcast, but also the daily offices. So the services that we inherit from our Roman Catholic faith predecessors and those sorts of things. So to begin talking about those, I guess, do you want to describe what those services are and how they come about?
Yeah, so we can call them the divine offices, the daily offices. Sometimes they're called the liturgy of the hours. I like what the ELW calls them, which is just daily prayer. That's what it is. And we did inherit them directly from our Catholic background, but also we get them from the Jewish background of Christianity. Right, we know in Deuteronomy it says that you should recite the Shema in the morning and in the evening. Somewhere in the Psalms it mentions 7 times a day I have praised you. Especially some early people interpreted this to mean, well, they prayed 7 times a day specifically. When you read Acts, you can see Peter and John going to the temple to pray about 3 o'clock. That was the hour of prayer. And so the divine offices are kind of a structure for praying at these different times of day. They're a way to mark the hours. That's why it's sometimes called the liturgy of the hours.
And so in particular, you talked about Matins, the morning prayer service, which is pretty interesting. And I think one of the things, if I remember correctly, you said something about the Matins is always appropriate because we're always celebrating the dawn, right?
That's right. And it's not just because I'm an Alaskan that I think this. That, the thing about prayer is sometimes we think of prayer as, I'm going to tell God what I want. It's my secret divine therapy. Sure, of course it is. But mostly prayer is about being in communion with Christ. Right? It's a way that communion manifests. And Christ is the light of the world. And so when we are in Christ, which by faith we always are, right? He has claimed us and brought us into himself. Therefore, we are always in his resurrection dawn. Right? So in one sense, morning prayer is the only prayer that we can pray. That's a bold claim. I'll also say evening prayer is the only prayer that we can pray. right? And night prayer is the only prayer that we can pray. But it's because we are in Christ and he is always in these moments of time because he's outside of time. Right? He's in this he has ascended. He is in this new way. And so we are joined to him. And so we can pray morning prayer whenever you need to. It's good to pray it in the morning. But if say you just need to do it, maybe for instance, for a while I worked the night shift at a hospital. Maybe your morning prayer is actually in the evening because you're waking up to go do that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of it.
So, do you have a tradition for yourself or your congregation that does morning prayer, or any of the others? Or
So I've been introducing it to my congregation. Part of it was practical. I was going on paternity leave, and one of the things about being a pastor in Alaska is you're it, right? In Fairbanks, I've got one retired pastor, and he is currently serving a vacancy at the other Lutheran church, and so it's me and my wife, but she's serving the Presbyterian church. So right, we don't have substitutes,
yeah,
and in particular, we don't have any like licensed lay ministers, very many, and that's just I need to find some, right? But
or make some really, yeah,
exactly,
Right.
But also, the Matins is kind of the original service of the word, and anybody can do it, and so it's a good lay-led service. So while I've been on paternity leave, I said, hey, do Matins because it's part of all of our duties. And I just basically adapted what was in the ELW. It's really a good rendition of Matins, and the probably the most innovative thing in it is the prayers. They have these really cool bidding prayers that are very lovely. I might have changed it to make it a little more rote because that's unfamiliar to my congregation. And that's one of the things you can do with these daily offices. There's sort of less rules, we might say, as maybe with a communion service. You can really mold it to whatever you need it to be. I use an adapted ELW tradition because it's faithful to our tradition.
Could you, Ollie, give us a rundown of the various liturgies and kind of roughly the times of day that they correspond to?
Right. So to use the Latin names, there's Matins. If you Google it, you're going to find some confusion because depending on who you ask, the morning is either at night, right? The Jewish calendar has the day beginning at sunset.
Mm-hmm.
And so the day begins there. So Matins might be like the night service.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea was that it was the next day. Sometimes it was the middle of the night service, sometimes called vigil as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's fair to call it the morning service, Matins. And so that's the first service. And in our book, we've got three. The next one is Vespers, which is the evening service. Most people are really familiar with holding evening prayer. And that's just part of the daily prayer office. It's just a setting of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one in our book is also very lovely. It's got some really great stuff in it. Then the final one in our book is Compline, which is, they call it night prayer. It's the prayer before you go to bed. It's kind of a prayer that has, it's a lot of resting in God's grace. It's really beautiful. It's also really good kind of pedagogy for death, right? Because you're giving up your spirit, saying, God, it's all on you. It's sort of an expanded version of that really old prayer, if I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take, but much more expansive and lovely. And that's kind of the three main offices. In our book, we also have what's just labeled responsive prayer. Sometimes it's called the suffrages. And in it, if you study it, it doesn't help you see this, but you can use it at kind of other times of day. And this is reflective of the older tradition of the Liturgy of the Hours, where you can do it up to 7 times a day, right? You can do it in the mid-morning and at noon and at 3 o'clock and yada, yada. And so the suffrages kind of act as, in our book, the other hours, the littler hours of the day. And it's a much shorter service.
Thanks.
There's a Catholic church down the street from me that has a chapel, and they
Mhm.
have a 15-minute service every morning. I think it's at 6:30 or 6:15 a.m. every day. I've thought about dropping in to see what they do, uh,
Mhm.
but it's early.
Mhm.
And I think about what calls people to do those things, to do
Mhm.
that service. I'm sure it's a spiritual discipline to do that something like that repeatedly, faithfully to draw you into prayer every day.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of other reasons why people would use that, or why a congregation might consider adding that to their stuff. We know, our pastors don't have enough to do, obviously. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, You know, it, it's funny because the question is basically why pray, you
sure.
know,
Mhm.
and because in my mind these offices, we think of them kind of as oh, it's another liturgy, which means it's another thing to do. It's got all this stuff, but we got to remember that liturgy is a way that the Holy Spirit makes prayer a gift,
Mhm.
right? How many times have you gone to communion and you didn't have the energy, but you could just say the words that were right there, right? And that was sort of God guiding you along. I think one reason that we can pray in this way is it helps it be a gift, right? I love my Pentecostal friends, but man, how are you freestyling prayers all the time? And also, we know that people get into ruts, right, when they pray. And, okay, I'm going to pray for my family in the exact same way that I've done, every day for the last month. When you have something like Matins, it can guide you, or any of the other divine offices,
Sure.
it can guide you to pray in such a way that you wouldn't, right? Part of that is because one of the big chunks of the divine office is the Psalms, right? And so when you pray the Psalms, especially if you're just praying like one after the other, which is a great way to do it, you're gonna pray for stuff that you would never pray for, right? Such as the downfall of your enemies. Maybe some people pray for that, but I, right? And so you're praying in a way that it expands your own prayer life, your own soul, and so you discover Christ in you in ways that you wouldn't have ever imagined, right? Yeah, it gives a format to your day. That's great. You know, for some people, they do it because, right? Well, especially our Roman Catholic friends, they're obligated to do it, right? They're asked to do that. But also, I think what I've found in living a life of trying to do daily prayer as best as I can, as frequently as I can, is it molds me to look at the time I spend as God's time, right? Even if you know, I've got a newborn.
This is Ben jumping in from the editing room. We lost some audio there, it got corrupted, so we're going to cut out some stuff, but I think it will carry on through.
Why are you thinking about what you're going to do for Lent? You're going to have a baby. And I was like, it's just what I do, right? I'm thinking about it, and I haven't done any of it because I'm changing diapers. I'm trying to get sleep. But 3 o'clock runs around, and I think, oh, Peter went to pray. Oh, Jesus hung on the cross maybe around 3 o'clock, and so just all of a sudden, looking at the clock becomes a slight uplift, right? As around 5 o'clock comes, that's when I would, in an ideal world, do Vespers. I start thinking about Jesus, the light of the world, right? Even when the sun is totally up, right? 5 o'clock in Alaska, right? Right, it helps me because I've been formed by it. And so in that way, I mean, the whole Christian life is just trying to remember that God is at work in our lives every single moment. And so the divine office is a gift that helps us get there.
So for someone who wants to do that but doesn't have a church that wants to offer, a thing to participate in, is there a way to use that? There's a lot of responsive prayers in there and songs. that are part of what we have there. I suppose even the responsive prayer, the suffrages, has a lot of the responsive stuff. Have you found a way to do that on your own as a thing outside of community?
Yeah, so yeah, I often do it on my own. Right? Most of the time I do it on my own. What I have done might not work for everybody, but I say all the words, even the responses,
Out loud.
and out loud. And I will out if I can, maybe it's early in the morning and my family's awake, right? Ideally I sing it, right? But I'm a singer and I like that kind of stuff. But let's say you aren't a singer and you just want to do it. What I would do, first of all, study the rubrics in the book, right? The italicized red words, right? They're a godsend, and they'll help you kind of go, what should I do here? And then speak it. Just speak the words, right? I include the responses. You might not, but in my head, I need to read every word in order to know where I'm at, right? And
Yeah.
so,
Gets
and
less
then
awkward with repetition too.
exactly.
Yeah.
And especially if you're singing it, the melodies flow together.
Mhm.
But if you're just speaking it, you'll do just fine. And I often it'll say, what's the prayer of the day? Well, if we were following the Book of Common Prayer, they've got a prayer for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We don't have that in our book. I like to just find one of the prayers in the front of the book. Often I'll do the prayer for peace, because why not? But I just try to find something right there, and I speak it. I go down. If you're good with hymns, there's a couple of hymn versions. Like say, there's some canticles in these offices that are traditional. Right in the morning, it's the Benedictus, where the Song of Zechariah. Sometimes singing canticles in that chanted format just doesn't jive with people. Our book has some great versions of it. Blessed be the God of Israel. Da 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 da. So you can find them in there, and you could do that. Sometimes I get to it has the little bidding prayers, and I'll follow them. Sometimes I don't want to follow them, and maybe that's a moment where I might jump to the suffrages because they have a morning version, or maybe that's a time I freestyle some prayer for a minute, and I just say what's on my heart. Why not? I mean, I'm kind of roughly going through the
Yeah.
service in my head right now, but that's an easy way to do it, and you can really make it your own that way. Sometimes if you need a down and dirty morning prayer and you want to do it in this way, just I love the opening. Oh Lord, open my lips and my mouth will proclaim your praise. I start my prayer that way, and then I jump straight to the Psalms. You know, especially that opening Psalm, Psalm 95. The version in our book is really beautiful. It's also pretty tricky to sing. I feel like it was written for like the St. Olaf choir or something. I think, my congregation is starting to get it, but you really need to practice it. So I might just start with Psalm 95 and read it kind of plainly.
Yeah.
But even Luther says, even if you just speak the Psalter, right, it has a music to its own, right? And even if you just speak the prayers that we have in our humble ELW, right, they too have a music of its own, and it still carries you in that wonderful way.
Awesome.
And of Luther, there's also in the ELW and elsewhere, you can find Luther's Small Catechism, which contains a simple morning and evening prayer ritual, and it's very basic. It doesn't have the dialogue liturgy that the one you're describing from ELW does. So for an individual who wanted to try this, and maybe feel a little less intimidated by starting a new ritual on their own, they might try Luther's version, which is pretty simple. After a while, you can even do it from memory. You recite the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, and then there's a simple prayer. It's just a couple of sentences for morning or for evening, whichever time of day you're doing it. And then Luther suggests, like you are, Ollie, reciting a psalm or reading a piece of scripture, and it's another great way to frame your devotion for that time of day.
I think he says, whatever joyfully serves your devotion.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've actually got my ELW right here because that's how Lutheran I am, right? The two pastors ELW. Look at me.
We have them memorized. I mean, come
that's
on.
right. That's right.
So when let's see, when your supply pastor is boring you next Sunday, page 1166 in the back of the hymnal, that gives you the ending part, and so that's the morning blessing and the evening blessing. You can read those there. And just a quote, Luther translated into English, of course. After singing a hymn, perhaps, for example, one on the Ten Commandments, or whatever else may serve your devotion, you are to go to your work joyfully.
Mhm.
And that's after the morning prayer. And then the one at the end of the evening prayer, I love that. And then you are to go to sleep quickly and cheerfully.
Right.
And I'm sure he was writing both of those to his kids.
That's right. That's right.
Because I'm sure, Ollie, that's probably on your mind most of the time right now.
Yeah. Oh, she is not cheerful.
Go to sleep cheerfully.
Yeah.
So
I actually, I have no proof or scholarship to support this, but I suspect that Martin Luther was not a sound sleeper.
No, I believe not.
Probably made a lot of sounds.
I don't think you can eat that much sausage and sleep well. I just,
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us more about Psalmcast. I know that you can find it at psalmcast.blog.
Not quite. It's psalms.blog.
Psalms.blog. Sorry. We'll get that right in the episode notes.
Right. It's a little pet project of mine because I fell in love with this book. Part of it was, early on in my formation, I didn't grow up in the church, and I started going to church, and then eventually I started figuring out maybe I'll go to seminary. And one of the ways that I found reprieve is I went to the monastery at Mount Angel, Oregon. It was not too far away from where I went to school, and I would sing the hours with these monks, and
Wow.
it was really joyful and gave me a lot of peace. And I mean, and they were praying 7 times a day, right? They were doing it all, and I felt uplifted by doing this. And then as I did my studies, I noticed, all of my heroes like Augustine and Luther and Bonhoeffer. And like Augustine found incredible insights. He was going off of the Latin version of the Psalms, but he found that God was being itself just by studying the Psalms, right? This is an extraordinary, and that's in that line, Jerusalem is a city bound firmly together, right? The Latin version of it is just like, it is what it is, right? And it's like, wow, that is like, I am what I am. And so you can pull so much out of the Psalms, right? Luther wrote at least 6 books on the Psalms, maybe. So you can just get so much out of it. So I thought I wanted to do that, see what happens for me. And the thing about the Psalmcast is I wanted to have a practical edge to it. So not only do we look at it, right? But we also look at it not just as this, this word of God, as anyone would study the Bible, but we look at it as words to God as well, right? And so Bonhoeffer has a great line about the Psalms where he says that the words that come from God will be the steps on which we find our way to God. And that's kind of been like a driving way for me to understand the Psalms, and especially as you put these words in your mouth, you discover yourself saying really lovely things. Like in Psalm 91, the end of Psalm 91 talks about how God becomes the speaker, right? And so God says, I will protect you. I will cherish you because you love me. I will give you long life. And you're saying those words. And so in that, I would argue we're discovering what we might call theosis, right? That God is filling us up just by saying these words, right? Where we kind of participate in his divine life through saying the Psalms. And that to me is a practical aspect. I mean, yet we learn about prayer. Prayer isn't just, I'm going to say, God, please, I really want an RV, please get me a windfall of money. But But prayer is so much more. In fact, prayer is proclamation of Jesus Christ with us. And the Psalms, I think, eventually as we study them, they get us there. So the Psalmcast is me trying to explicate that psalm by psalm.
Oh,
Yeah.
hey, I do have one more just little detailed question for you, Ollie.
Mhm.
Is there a particular translation of the Psalms that you personally find helpful for your own devotion?
The Catholics have, I think it's called the Grail
Mhm.
commentary. The poetry of it is very, very interesting and captures my attention.
Mhm.
It can be a little off-putting. It translates the word holocausts as holocausts, which can, like, when I first started reading it, I was like, what the heck is going on here? I didn't know that was a Bible word. But good poetry there. I often will read, like for the podcast, I'll read from the NRSV UE now, because that's our new version. There's this, I don't know if it's new. It's the Evangelical Heritage version. Have you heard of this Bible?
Hmm.
It's allegedly Lutheran, and I want to say it might come from the Wisconsin Synod, but it's supposed to follow the evangelical Lutheran tradition. I think they do a good job with the Psalms. They have the frankness of the language.
Hmm.
But and these days I'm recommending the Common English Bible all the time, because I think maybe it's not as poetic and accurate, or not accurate, but distinct as some of these more academic versions, but it's scholarly and it is readable. So that's not, my answer is what version? I don't know, the one you'll read.
And I think that's fine for folks to make that choice on their own. I was just curious if you had one for yourself. So
The Bible that my laptop is currently propped up on right now is the Evangelical Heritage version. I'm trying it out, and I think I kind of like it.
okay.
Yeah, but I don't know.
All right.
Well, I don't think you get reported to the authorities for it, so you're okay.
Right.
Yeah, they'll have to find you.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Ollie, we're going to keep you around for our catechism questions.
Okay.
So our last episode had a catechism question, which everyone is invited to call in or leave a message for us. So our last question was, what happened to the prodigal son when he returned home? Our answers were lots of things, like being sent back to the pig farmer, that his brother threw a party for him, and they took him back as a hired servant. But the true answer was that his father welcomed him back and killed the fatted calf to throw a party. So we don't have any winners. We're recording a little bit early on this, so go ahead and send in your answers, and we'll still give you credit, because we all know it's all about scorekeeping in the end. So
That's right.
that's right. So what about this episode, Keith?
All right. So what are the names of some of the divine office liturgies? Is it Matins, Ford, Sext, and Vespers? Is it Lauds, Prime, Nome, and Vespers?
Ben from the editing room floor again. We had some more corruption on this file. Lots of it, actually. But let me give you the rest of the answers here. So Chevelle, Compline, Sext, and Lauds, or Matins, Lauds, Vespers, and Compline. You can respond to our questions through our social media and email, which is all found in our contact information. Main Street Lutherans is hosted by Keith Fair and Ben Fote, and it is produced by Fote Media Productions. Find all our contact information, links, and a transcript in our episode notes. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a wonderful talk, and I hope we get to talk on the podcast and all over the other ways forever. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Until next time, go in peace, serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.